Davina's heart raced with great fear as she opened the door that led her to her hostel. The same hostel she once shared with her three girlfriends. Joshua, the house fellowship master, has advised her to stay completely away from that hostel, considering the recent strange occurrence. But Davina cared more about her valuable belongings that were still left in that hostel. As she stepped in, the door closed behind her forcefully by some strange external forces. Davina immediately began to regret ever coming back to the hostel. She turned sharply to leave through the same door she came in, but the door refused to unlock. Almost immediately, she began to hear some strange cries coming from the darker end of the room. Davina collapsed. Once, there was a woman named Juliana. Juliana is a widow and a mother of one. Davina is the name of her only daughter. After the death of her husband, Juliana struggled to cater for herself and Davina. It wasn't an easy task, but Juliana was able to endure. Davina went through primary school, then secondary school, and finally she was faced with the trouble of gaining admission into the university of her choice. Juliana made sure Davina had access to almost all good things that life could offer as pertaining education, but the problems of university was a big burden. Juliana, being a devoted Christian, prayed honestly about this, in addition to her consistent hard work alongside Davina. One fateful evening, Davina returned home from a stroll with her friends, very excited. She had just discovered that she had finally gained admission into the university. Juliana was equally happy and believed it was God's blessings. Preparations were made and finally, Davina was ready to leave for university. Juliana had a very lengthy conversation with her daughter on the day of her departure. Just as every mother would do, Juliana poured out her heart to Davina. She gave her a series of advice and prayed for her success. You had to wait this long, and finally, you are going to be a university student. This God's blessing shall never add sorrow to you. Please, Davina, mingle only with the right people and be extra careful in making decisions. Juliana said to her daughter. Of all she said, this was alone lingering in Davina's head. Throughout the journey, Juliana's last word of advice kept re-echoing in Davina's head till finally she fell asleep. When she woke up, she was already at her destination. She alighted the bus, grabbed her luggages with the help of some truck pushers, and trekked down the path that led directly to the University of Ibadan. Davina smiled as she stood for a while, admiring the magnificent entrance of the school. It felt like a dream come true. The truck pusher dropped her luggages at the hostel since it wouldn't be possible for her to struggle with the much load alone. She paid him off, feeling satisfied. Davina was welcomed into the hostel by 3 other female occupants. It felt inappropriate to her having to share a house with 3 other strangers, but their warm welcome made her nerves calm. Not long after, she became really acquainted to the 3 other students. They were really fun to live with. They did things together. They were helpful to one another, and most especially, they treated Davina with much love as though she was their youngest sister. Time passed. As Davina studied hard, Juliana called from time to time. The 4 friends rolled as best friend, excelled in most of her subjects, and continued with great success till she got to her 2nd year. Things changed abruptly. It all began one Friday night. Davina was having a midnight reading session when she noticed that one of the girls was not in bed. She at first assumed that Joy, the girl in particular, was in the toilet or something else. Fear gripped her when her eyes fell on an image standing by the curtain. Davina looked intensely to be sure her mind wasn't playing tricks on her. The image by the curtain has the form of a human, but was totally black from head to toe, and was impossible to dictate if it was a male or a female. The image looked just like a shadow, but it was moving like a being with life. Davina was paralyzed with fear. She only managed to put away her books and lay down flat on the bare floor. She held her breath and closed her eyes tightly as sweat ran down her forehead. After a while, there was a movement of cool breeze. Davina was tempted to open her eyes, and when she did, the image was already gone. Strangely, Joy was also back in the bed as though she never left. Davina prayed silently for morning to come. The occurrence was too strange for her to comprehend. The next morning, Davina woke up to her mother's last word of advice ringing in her head. She decided not to confront Joy and went about as if nothing had happened. 3 other nights that same week, the same thing repeated. She became scared of many things as she battled with the trauma caused. Her grades began to suffer as she could no longer concentrate. She even started having nightmares. Finally, she called her mother and requested for a change of hostel. Juliana's voice sounded weak over the phone during the conversation. Davina realized that her mother was terribly ill and had gotten into bad debt. Technically speaking, Juliana will be unable to provide for Davina's need any further. It was a huge blow to Davina. Dropping out of school was not an option. While she worried about her sick mother, she worried about her studies. She worried about her strange roommate, Joy. Later on, Davina was introduced to a group of Christian students that hold fellowship together as a church. The house fellowship leader, Joshua by name, was kind-hearted Christian. It did not take long before he noticed Davina and offered to help. He and the other capable members of the fellowship made donations to fund Davina, but the real trouble was kept a secret for reasons best known to her. Davina only voiced her financial struggles and was too afraid, or rather careful, to mention about Joy and the strange events. Joshua coached Davina as though she was a new convert. Before long, they became friends. Nonetheless, Davina's conscience would not let her become a burden to Joshua and his fellowship members, so she said only her needs. She struggled to maintain an average lifestyle with her new petty business of selling bean cakes, or rather called akara. Temptations to seek money the odd ways came, but Davina believed there was no excuse to do wrong. Sometime during exam periods, Davina was resting in her room with the other girls after concluding one stressful and brainstorming subject. Joy suddenly brought out a packet of cookies and shared amongst all of them. She smiled as she gave each girl a share of the cookie. To others, it was a simple act of generosity, but Davina was being so careful when she kept her share aside and pretended to be of a clear mind. She even said a generous thank you to Joy. That night, Davina had a strange dream. She saw Joy standing afar off. The look in her eyes were terrible, and she tried to convince Davina to come closer to no avail. The next morning, Grace and Opeyemi, Davina's other roommates, narrated their dreams to her. Strangely, their dreams were almost like the ones Davina had, except that they did went closer to Joy and were forced into a pit with no way out. Somehow, Davina believed that the strange dreams had something to do with the cookie Joy gave them. She had the urge to confront Joy, but something in her kept disagreeing. Davina had to confide in Joshua. She told him all that had been happening and asked for help. Joshua joined Davina in prayers and offered help as much as he could, morally and spiritually. Few weeks later, one of Davina's roommates, Grace, fell sick. The sickness grew day by day that Grace was rushed to the hospital. After few days, she was discharged, but strangely, the sickness surfaced again. During this pandemic, Joy announced that she would be traveling for some emergencies. Davina was greatly troubled as she believed that Joy had a hand in Grace's sickness. Soon afterwards, Joy traveled for the so-called emergency. Sick Grace, Opeyemi, and Davina went to reside in the hostel only. Strangely that night, Davina woke up to find a fourth person in the room. Davina was gripped with fear. She lay down still on the bed and pretended to be asleep. Her eyes were half opened, half closed. She watched as the fourth person stood up and walked toward the bed. Davina was already close to peeing on herself. The strange person was as dark as a shadow and wore a big garment that covered the head to toe. The strange person called upon Grace. Grace innocently took out her torchlight and carelessly pointed it at the stranger's face. "Joy, I thought you traveled." Grace screamed, and that was the last thing that happened before Grace turned back into the bed. Immediately, the stranger disappeared. Davina could no longer sleep. It was now very obvious that evil was going on. Thankful enough, morning came quickly. Davina woke up Opeyemi and narrated all that she saw. Together, the two girls tried to wake Grace, but to no avail. Grace's hands turned cold and stiff, which means only one thing: Grace was dead. Opeyemi's parents are well-to-do, so just one call, another hostel was arranged for her. While Opeyemi packed her things to relocate that instant, Davina wondered what explanation would be given to the people. Who would believe their reports about Joy? What will be done with Grace's body? Opeyemi cared less about any of that and continued packing her things to leave. "God forbid that I spend another night in this hostel," Opeyemi exclaimed. As Opeyemi concluded packing, she sighted a note on the dressing table. She supposed it was something important of hers. She picked it up and screamed at what she saw. It was the names of the three girls, written with blood on the white sheet. Grace was first written, then below was the name of Opeyemi, and lastly, Davina. Without wasting much time, Opeyemi packed her remaining belongings and left. Poor Davina had nowhere to go. Her mother was still down with sickness. She had no other friends, and Joshua lived outside campus. For the time being, Davina ran away out of the hostel to catch some fresh air. If she spent much time alone in that room, she would definitely pass out. She wandered about the campus like a bird with no resting place. Soon, Grace's body would be discovered and disposed. Davina feared that she and Opeyemi may even be in for more trouble, as they would be suspected for running away like that, leaving Grace's dead body behind. Maybe she should report to the police, Davina thought, or maybe not. Davina was restless. Later in the evening, she met Joshua. She narrated everything to him. He offered to accommodate her for the time being and join her in prayers. He also advised her to report to the police. "I need to get my belongings first," Davina said to Joshua. "They are not safe in that room." Joshua disagreed with her going back to the hostel, but Davina remained adamant. She considered how expensive it would be to purchase new clothing, books, and other important belongings. She went back to her hostel. Davina's heart raced with great fear as she opened the door that led to her hostel, the same hostel she once shared with her three girlfriends. Joshua, the house fellowship master, had advised her to completely stay away from that hostel, considering the recent strange occurrence, but Davina cared more about her valuable belongings that were still left in that hostel. As she stepped in, the door closed behind her forcefully by some strange external forces. Davina immediately began to regret ever coming back to the hostel. She turned sharply to leave through the same door she came in, but the door refused to unlock. Almost immediately, she began to hear some strange cries coming from the darker end of the room. Davina collapsed.